Also, do you ever just like say a word over and over again, and then it just starts to sound just not like the word is just dumb? Like the word just sounds wrong the more you say it.
No, usually it works the opposite. It sounds right the way you say it. But it's usually, for me, it's always wrong. But, yes, here's my glasses. I might need these. All right. We are still in the book of the Revelation, chapter number 7, this morning, verses 9 and 10. Still, since the First Lady was sick this week, I didn't bothering her to work out some things. So hopefully this week I can, and we can get a time and stuff. But of course, it's going to be close to dark, so in that 5 to 6 o'clock range, obviously, unless we meet early to go eat. But Saturday, yeah, Saturday evening. What you said, 7? Okay. But as once I picked the date, me and Miss Ginger picked the date. It has come to my attention that there are a few parades happening around like that night, like Halls. So if we go into Halls area, we'll have to stay away from Maynardville Highway. So, but luckily, a lot of the places that I know we'd have to go the long way around, but we can do that. Stay away from between the high school and Black Oak Plaza where the Halls parade goes down. So, if you have an area, that's something that you might want to keep an eye on to see if they're having a parade at night or something like where we live in Halls. So, but that'll be that night, and there's quite a few out in that area. But we'll go out and see what we like, see what we see. All right, so still in our series here about backyard missions and the importance of it, and as we see in our text verse, Revelations chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, it says, "After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb." And of course, it's like we've stated before, it's kind of an odd passage of scripture to kind of pull the thought of missions out. But once we understand the context of the verse and what's going on here and behind it, it does kind of make sense. Of course, we've said the driving thought we've tried to lift out of this lesson is that it is possible to win the lost even in the most difficult times and places in our life. A lot of times we just kind of think, well, I don't know if it's worth it. We talked about a lot of that last week. The other thing is that the place many of us are called to serve is the mission field known as our backyard. As we tried to remember the term last week, and we got off and finally zeroed in on it. The Great Commission. That is our mission call. That is what what God has put in us as Christians. That's what He expects us to do, to take the gospel, just as He gave the gospel and gave the commission to the disciples there at the end of before He left this world after the resurrection. He gave that to them. That is something that we continue to honor and serve and work towards even today, even though we weren't alive in the original 12 that was given that commission. That commission still transcends to us today. And therefore, that's kind of why we're looking at the thought of backyard missions when it comes to us. Of course, a couple of weeks ago we talked about the mission field of friendships, and we talked about how friendships oftentimes are a necessity. It's a necessary part of our life. I mean, it's you know, a lot. Most people today, I mean, there are some recluses. There's some people that just generally don't like being around a lot of people. I don't necessarily like being around a lot of people, you know, like theme parks and places like that where there's, you know, tens of thousands of people crammed into a small place. I have went to sporting events. Me and Brady last year went to the Vanderbilt game in Nashville. Now that's a small place, but there's still a lot of people around. That's kind of, you know, that doesn't bother me, but it's just, I just don't like being around a lot of people moving around constantly. That's why if you go to Buc-ee's on the weekends, you're going to experience that, as was our first trip. And, you know, it was a little unnerving for me the first time going. But that's just me. I mean, every one of us in here are, you know, a little bit different as far as how we approach things and how we handle things. But friendships are a necessity. That it's something that God instituted when He first created Adam back in the Garden of Eden. He said it's not good for man to be by himself, and that's why He created Eve, a helpmeet, because all the other animals had someone to help them that God had created, so therefore He created Eve. It's not unusual for a believer to bring a lost friend or spouse to Christ, but there's a greater chance that oftentimes that lost person or spouse will drag the Christian away. So, even though friendships are a necessity, in this mission field of friendships, it's also, we have to be vigilant not to allow someone to offset us, to derail us, to take us on a detour in our walk with God and take us off track. The friendship mission field is a very difficult field oftentimes, because who we are away from church often is who we really are. You know, it's real easy for a lot of people to come into church and put on a smile and put on their Christian, best, and come in and deceive and fool a lot of people. I mean, I've heard different preachers throughout my years, and one would even talk about how oftentimes him and his wife would be arguing and fussing all the way to church because he was like, we're leaving early. And she's like, okay. And she's the last one out of the house, and they were late. And this is the pastor of the church. He's late every Sunday. They argued the whole way to church. And as soon as they get on the church parking lot, open the door to the car, it's, all that's gone, and they put on a facade. They put on this thing like nothing has happened, that everything's, peachy and everything's coming up roses and stuff. And, we have that ability as individuals, as people. We have that ability. We have the ability to, when we leave this place, become somebody completely and totally different. And that's why a lot of times it's difficult for us to reach those who know us best, meaning our family and our closest friends. The good thing about this difficult yet vastly important mission field is that friendships don't have to end. We can take those with us into eternity. As long as we're willing to put the time in, the effort in to reach our lost friends, we can take them with us into eternity. Last week we talked about the mission field of futility and just kind of what all that meant. This mission field is the most difficult field to get people to care about, because a lot of times we as Christians have already decided that it's just not worth it. It's not worth our time. We talked about how a lot of times in our minds we've already, we've talked about reading the back of our Bibles, and we know, that Christ is coming back. We know everything's going to come out good for the saved, the redeemed. You know, we know where we're going. We know what's going to happen to us in the end. But a lot of times we oftentimes get sidetracked in that, in knowing that, and we become blind to the need that's around us right now here in the present time. We also talked about the fact that this is an area to which Christ does not need our help. God does not need our help to not reach the lost so that things will get bad sooner. It's still in God's time. You know, I mean, that's just, you know, anytime God puts something on your heart to do, just like me with this class, and I've used this example, you know, hundreds of times. Y'all probably get tired of hearing me say it. But when God put starting this class on my heart, that was in August of last year, and it didn't come to fruition until March. It was all according to God's timing and how me and the pastor and everything else kind of worked together and worked with each other, and he was testing me to see if I was serious about it and everything else. So a lot of times when God puts something in our hearts, there's going to be a timetable in His time, and everything will happen. Just like the second when He, you know, Christ Himself in the Gospels testified to the fact that He Himself doesn't know when He's coming back. Only the Father, only God knows when He's going to look at Christ on His right hand and say, "Go get the church, go get your bride," and then we're raptured out of here. Only God knows that. So if only God knows that, and only God knows the things that He has in store for us, and it's up to us to kind of, in our walk with Him, in our faith in Him, to find what He's wanting for our life, He will reveal that to us in His time. So God doesn't need our help to let the world get so bad, so quick, so that we force His hand into coming back. That's not how it works. So we still have the call, we still have the commission to go and reach the lost. And then along that thought, just a quick question. Have you ever give thought to this? What if the person that reached you for the cause of Christ had the attitude that the majority of Christians have today about reaching the lost? That's a somber thought. If we don't care enough to invest the time to go out and reach the lost as today's church, as today's Christians, what would have happened to us? Where would we be if the people that reached us had the same thought? I mean, it's like, you know, Josiah's grandfather, you know, up there in, was it the treatment plant? Had that one guy not had his grandfather on his list, where would this family be today? More than likely, they might have, but from his testimony, from where y'all have talked, he didn't, God wasn't on his radar. Church wasn't on his radar. And chances are he probably wouldn't have gotten into church, probably wouldn't have got saved, wouldn't have had the generations coming behind him faithful in church and stuff. That's what we're talking about. If the people that reached us had the mentality and the forewithal to reach us, had the same mentality that a lot of times we have, we wouldn't have gotten saved. We wouldn't have been reached, at least not by the people that reached us. So it is important. The mission field of futility, this is a mission field in which we have to overcome our own selves, and we kind of talked about that a lot last week. And then I do want to read this one portion of Scripture in 2 Corinthians, dealing with that thought. This mission field, the mission field of futility, is not a mission field commissioned by God. It is a mission, it's a misstep commissioned by the devil to trick us, to keep us from doing the will of God. And 2 Corinthians 11, Verses 13 through 15 says, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ." Verse 14, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." 15 says, "Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." I mean, that's Paul telling us, almost, 15, 18, maybe closer to 2,000 years ago, about Satan himself and how he has the ability to transform. That's why the Bible, if you're a Bible study and you're a Bible scholar and you study the Bible, that's why there's one portion of the Bible that tells us that we are to try the spirits, because everything that comes our way may not be of God. So you have to, sometimes you have to try the spirits. You have to see, is this of God or is this a lie from the devil? Which one is it? How's this going to go? And then we talked about the fact that this is the reason, as we were reading in our that 2 Corinthians, the ability that Satan has, the reason he has that is so that he can try to deceive us. Anything that speaks against what we have been commissioned and called to do, oftentimes is of the devil. It's not of God. God's not going to give the commandment. He's not going to commission us to go reach the lost and then tell us not to reach the lost. The only one that's going to tell us that reaching the lost is not worth it is the devil himself. So, and that brings us up to the mission field of the future. The success of this mission field greatly depends on the beliefs in the previous two mission fields. If we have the mentality of reaching our friendship, the people in our own backyard, the people that we come into contact with, the people that we have an opportunity to. Like we said earlier, John has his own mission field. He has people that he comes into contact with that chances are I'll never come into contact with. That's his mission field. The same thing is true for Brady back there, Josiah, anybody else in here. We all have our own network. We all have our own place that we're sent out and sent into. And a lot of times we're the only ones that's got a opportunity to reach those people. A lot of times we think that, it's somebody else's responsibility. No, it's ours. It's our responsibility. We're tasked with that. When we go out into our mission field, when we go out with the people that we run with, the people that we hang with, the people we go to school with or class with, work with, whatever, that is our mission field. That's the people that you're going to have the greatest opportunity and responsibility to reach. So therefore, like I said, the success of the mission field of the future depends on us. It depends on, do we take it seriously or do we believe the lie that it's not worth it? If we believe the lie that it's not worth it, then nothing's going to get done. The lost are not going to get reached. But that all comes back to us. This mission field is not the responsibility for the actions and deeds of those who've gone before us. If you've noticed that today, in society today, nobody wants to take responsibility for themselves. We see that in the justice system. You see that with the way people always have somebody else to blame. Well, it ain't my fault. That's just the way I was raised. My mom did me this way. No, we all have the opportunity to break those molds. I mean, getting a little personal, my family, going all the way back to my grandfather on my dad's side of the family, divorce has been a big thing that has run through my family. And it ran through the generation that I was a part of, in my generation. And I've made the joke for years, and my mom's probably going to hear this, but I've made the joke for years in telling people that my parents liked getting divorced so much they married each other just so they could divorce twice. My sister, and if she's listening, she'll find out what I'm fixing to say. But she's on her third marriage. Not to the same person, not like my mom and my dad, but it's her third. It's ran through my family. If given the opportunity, I could have followed that, but I didn't. I haven't, and I pray to God that it doesn't happen in my family. But we all have the opportunity. We can, if you have the resolve enough within you through what God is doing in your life, you have that opportunity to break any mold someone puts on you because of something that's happened in the past. Just like what the future of our mission field looks like is not dependent on what somebody before us does. You probably run into that. If you start trying to reach people at school, or you try to start reaching people where you work, or whatever, people you come into contact with in your daily life, you're going to run into a few people that's going to have some not so nice things to say about their experience with other Christians. You cannot let that affect your attempt to try to reach that person. Because they've had a bad experience doesn't mean that as long as we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and we're following God like we're supposed to be following God, it does not mean that we do not have the opportunity to finally break through and reach that person. But if we take the negative feedback that they're giving us and we just say, well, it ain't worth it, there's no reason to keep trying, then we're just allowing that soul to just go right off into hell. And that's why it's important. That's why what happened before us, we cannot allow to affect us today. That responsibility will be given to us. We will have to give an account as a Christian at the judgment seat of Christ for the things done in our bodies as Christians, in deed and word. Our words we say are going to come back to haunt us if they don't already a lot of times. I mean, have you ever said something you regret saying? That word come back to haunt you immediately. The things that we say when nobody's around, the character that we are when nobody's around, there's always somebody around. His name is the Lord God. We're going to give an account for those things that we've done. And if you're like me and you're honest with yourself, you're not looking for, that's not the fun part of getting to see and meet God, is having to go through that experience. I'm not looking forward to that. I would like to bypass that, but there's no bypassing God's will. There's no bypassing the things that God. I'm going to have to stand there and give an account for the things that I've done. And I'm not looking forward to that. Because I've got some things that in my past that haunt me. We all do. There's something that haunts us in our life, in our past, that we're going to have to give an account for. Don't let throwing your hands up and saying it's not worth reaching the lost to be one of those. Please, don't. We see in our text verse, going back to Revelation, it says, "And after this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands." And as we've come to understand this, verse 9, that multitude is talking about the tribulation saints. Those that are going to be saved and brought to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ through the tribulation. These are going to be a great multitude that's never heard the gospel. I remember a guy that I used to work with back when, before Destiny was born. We were working at the same place, and that's where I was working when Destiny was born. His mentality was this, that somebody's got to take the gospel through the tribulation, and that's what I believe God has for me. So he didn't believe in God now, in present. This was 20-something years ago. He didn't believe in God then. I hope he's come around. But if he hasn't, he believed in God in eternity, but he didn't believe in God now, if that makes sense. He thinks his calling, he's heard of God, he's heard the gospel, so therefore, because he's heard the gospel and he's rejected it, the great multitude of the tribulation saints is not those that's heard the gospel here on this side of the tribulation. It's those that's never heard, never had the opportunity to experience and to accept Christ. That's the tribulation saints. And those that are going to reach them, he's not one of the 144,000. So we've talked about that's 12,000 from each tribe of Israel that God has set aside and sealed. Those are going to be the 12,000 from each tribe that takes the gospel to and through the tribulation. That's who God's going to use. He's not going to use David. He's not going to use, so-and-so over here or whoever. He's going to use who he's got set aside and sealed for that time. And those that have heard the gospel and rejected it, they're not going to be the ones taking it to the lost and dying world through the tribulation. So, like I said, therefore, in our text verse number 9 here, that great multitude, that is going to be those that come through the tribulation. And as we've talked about, we think society, we think the way the world's set up right now is difficult to take the cause of Christ and the name of Christ and salvation to. It's not going to be anything near what it's going to be during this time of the tribulation. So as we see, the mission field of the future. And I guess I forgot to turn my phone down. How about that? It's not wanting to cooperate with me to where I can now. So sorry about that, guys. In closing, our backyard is everyone's mission field. The Great Commission is to all born-again believers. So as we see, not only is our friendships, the people that we come into contact with, those we work with, those we just by chance run into, that's our mission field. That's what we are called as Christians. That's what we're to do. We're to take that gospel there. And I'm not up here telling you that it's easy. It's not. It's very difficult. But as I'm sure Josiah can attest to, it's well worth the risk to take that gospel to someone that you know. And you might be running the risk on alienating a friendship or two, but it would be well worth giving that person the opportunity to accept Christ and to know about Christ than to just keep that friendship here, and then when everything's done here, whether we go out in the rapture or we die and go out of the grave, that person dying and going to hell. If you care about that person as an individual, then we should be reaching them. But that's the Great Commission. Far too often, the church has adopted this attitude that it's not my responsibility. That's why we hire the pastor. That's why we have deacons. And that's the Sunday school teacher's job. It's somebody, like I said, the world in which we live today, it's somebody else's responsibility. Whether it's, for something that's happened to us, or in this instance, somebody else can do that. I'm not. That's not my call. That's not how God's wanting to use me. As a Christian, our responsibility is to take the gospel to a lost and dying world. That's the Great Commission. Everyone has that. Few people have greater gifts, different gifts that God gives us. I mean, like I've said and time again, just because you're not the pastor, just because you're not a deacon, a trustee, whatever office holder in the church, if you're in the church and you're sitting on the pew, you have a mission field, you have a gift, you have something, whether it's just being in attendance, whether it's praying or going out and reaching the lost. We all have that expectation put on us from the Lord Himself. The truth, the devil ever so desperately wants to keep us from realizing is this: we can still have the church of our dreams. I mean, who in here wouldn't like to see this place filled up, running to capacity? I mean, that's the goal of every church, right? To be full and needing to expand or needing to go to different types of services, extra services and so forth, because of the desire for people to want to come here and experience God. That should be what we want. That should be our dream. That should be our greatest desire as Christians, to see this church filled to capacity. Sitting in the choir loft for the service. Maybe sometimes having to set chairs out. That should be the dream and the desire of every Christian that attends a local body, a local church. And if we're doing what we can cause that to happen. But that's the dream. That should be the dream of every Christian. A church full of eternal friendships. People, when they come into this place, they need to feel the warmth of the Christian atmosphere, the Christian fellowship, the Christian friendship. They should be able to feel that, know there's something different about this place. And then as they continue to come here and continue to visit, and then maybe one day join, then we have added to a friendship. There's someone else here to get to know, to grow, and to finish our walk together with in friendships. And those friendships are eternal. Now, there's going to be some that come in here that believe they're saved, can act like they're saved, but have been deceived. That's happened. We've heard testimonies and stories of that actually happening here with one of the former pastor's youngest daughters. Thought forever she was saved. And for years and years and years, and fought the call that God, you need to get saved. Fought that. No, I'm saved. No, I'm good. Fought that until finally one day she just couldn't fight it no more, and she came down front and got saved. There's people that will come through here. You cannot take for granted that everyone that comes in here. The Bible tells us over in the Gospels, Christ Himself gives us this statement. He said, there'll be people that say, Lord, Lord, did we not do great and mighty works in your name? And I'm paraphrasing. Did we not do all this in your name? And He's going to say, depart from me, ye that work iniquity, for I never knew you. There's going to be people that come through the church that think they're saved, and they're as lost as a ball in high weeds. But that's the reality. That's why we never stop trying to reach, and we never stop giving the gospel out, because you never know who that individual is that's going to come through a Sunday school class, that's going to come through a service thinking they're saved, and it's just going to take that one time for the Lord to just get a hold of their heart and say, you're not saved. To break through that shell, to break through that hardness of our hearts and our belief that we're saved because of some little experience we had as a kid or whatever it was. There's going to be those people. And like I said, that's why we don't keep giving the gospel. That's why we do. We continually give out the gospel of the cause of Christ, because There's going to be some people that come in this church that'll get up there and join by statement of faith, and they're lost because they've been deceived by the devil. And eventually, at some point in time, if you keep giving the word out, God says His word will not return void. If we keep pushing and we keep breaking through that shell, eventually that word's going to get into that heart and convict that heart. No, you're not saved. That's the eternal friendships that we have. That's why it's so important that we continually present the gospel in our bodies, a living sacrifice, as the book of Romans tells us. Present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is our what? Reasonable service. The mission field of our backyard. It's not a mission field we have to go out, debutize for, and go out and learn another language. It's just the mission field right here that surrounds each and every one of us in this building, online, in this church, in this Sunday school class, whatever. It is our responsibility. And we are tasked with that responsibility. Just whether we realize it or not, or hope we don't. You know, for years, this age group right here, we've coasted on mom and dad. We've followed mom and dad. We're right now in that age, as a college age, in our mid-20s, late teens, early 20s and stuff. We're in that age to where it's time for us to start figuring out our own walk for ourselves. I mean, I had to do it. I had the opportunity. I had to make that decision that I was going to get in church and I was going to follow God and I was going to do what He's put on my heart to do. And I have. I've not always been the most faithful at it. I've not always been, every service, but I've had that desire and that drive and that pull in my heart and in my spirit to do what we're doing. And that's the way it is with you all. Y'all are going to be experiencing that on your own at different times as you continue to move and grow in your faith and in your walk with God. And that is important for each and every one of us. Even those that's maybe a little bit older, that have never given themselves to the Lord. That's still an opportunity. That's still something that you have to kind of walk through, wade through, and follow Him. But He will show us if we're willing to give of ourselves and give of our time and invest that into Him. He'll open doors for us. He'll open doors to friendships, to give you an opportunity just to crack it open and give a little gospel seed out. You just never know. But that's how important a backyard mission is. Like I said, it's not a mission field we have to debutize and go, to Africa for. It's right here. It's us. It's our opportunity. What are we going to do with it? That's the question. What are you going to do with your own mission field that you have been commissioned for in your own backyard? Just a thought. The backyard of missions. All right, you are free to go.